Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Global Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I want to record a short podcast on the developments taking place today in Washington, namely the signing of a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, there are two quite notable features of this agreement. The first of which is obviously that it's happening in Washington at all, because keep in mind that Armenia and Azerbaijan had been constituent republics of the former USSR. Originally, they'd been part of the so-called Transcaucasian Federation, which was also one of the founders of the USSR. But from 1936 through to 1991, they had been independent republics of the former USSR. And ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia had been the power broker, had been the big player in the Caucasus, mediating the very acrimonious relations between the two republics. They'd fought a war in the late 1980s over the Armenian enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia won that war, so the enclave within Azerbaijan was run by the local Armenians, and this went on for a long time until 2020, when Azerbaijan launched a military offensive, a very quick, decisive military offensive, and defeated Armenia. That was in November 2020. A peace agreement was cobbled together, but that didn't last very long. In 2023, Azerbaijan just moved in for the kill and removed the Armenian presence from Nagorno-Karabakh altogether. But the conclusion that one drew almost immediately from what happened in 2020 and what happened in 2023 was that Russia really was a player from the past when it came to the Caucasus. Russia wasn't able to provide any military assistance to Armenia during the Azerbaijani offensive in November 2020. And that was a very painful issue for Armenia because, of course, Armenia was and is, to a small extent, a member state of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a sort of Eastern version of NATO dominated by Russia. So Armenia was in that this alliance, but nobody came to Armenia's assistance. So that was a painful moment for Armenia. And then, of course, when Azerbaijan essentially violated the agreement that was signed under Russian auspices in November 2020, when he violated the agreement by driving out ethnic cleansing. There's no other word, no other way of putting it. Through ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia didn't lift a finger to help Armenia. So obviously that was a moment when Armenia had to reflect on its geopolitical situation and on which countries, which allies or would-be allies it could rely on in the future. But what also is decisive here is that Azerbaijan, which was gleeful when in 2020 Russia didn't lift a finger to help its adversary Armenia. They were absolutely giddy with excitement that Russia basically adopted a hands-off policy. They had to have been a little bit surprised since it's in Russia's backyard. Russia would have a say in how issues such as Nagorno-Karabakh, which had been going on for decades, how an issue like that would be resolved. Nonetheless, Russia didn't do anything. So Azerbaijan was very gleeful, and then, of course, Azerbaijan was doubly gleeful that Russia didn't do anything in 2023 when it cleansed Nagorno-Karabakh of Armenian presence altogether. But instead of expressing gratitude to Russia, Azerbaijan has cultivated very bad relations with Russia. We've covered that in several podcasts, so we don't need to repeat that. But other than to say that relations are very fraught between Azerbaijan and Russia. So Armenia and Azerbaijan have something in common. They both are determined to distance themselves as much as possible from Russia. So therefore, it's not that surprising that this meeting, the signing of an agreement, takes place in the United States. But in a way, it is it's not surprising that Russia has no part in it. It is surprising why they've decided to arrange this meeting in Washington rather than, say, France or Germany, that had taken an interest in the past in the affairs of the South Caucasus. And that brings up the second issue as to why there's something striking about this agreement, and namely that there is a very strong economic component to it. And that is the building of a road, railway, transportation connection across the Zangezur corridor, linking Western Azerbaijan with the Nakhchivan exclave. So that's, the Soviets had kind of carved out these entities in a very arbitrary way, part of their divide and rule agenda, which meant that this exclave of Nakhchivan was separated from Azerbaijan proper by Armenia. And so all these years, the only way Azerbaijan was able to maintain contact with Nakhchivan was by going around Armenia, going through Iran. But now that Azerbaijan has the wind in its sail, it demands that a road and rail transport corridor be built across Armenian territory. And Armenia isn't really in a terribly strong position to resist Azerbaijan's demands. In principle, Armenia doesn't have anything against building a transport corridor. What it would insist on, however, is that any road and railway link across Armenian territory would be under the control of the sovereign Republic of Armenia. That's what you would expect. But Azerbaijan has said, absolutely not. We will not allow anyone from Armenia anywhere near this road, railway, transport corridor. It has to be under Azerbaijani control altogether. So this would be obviously a violation of Armenian sovereignty. So Armenia has been very reluctant to agree to this demand, and hence a very elaborate plan was conjured up, whereby essentially this corridor would be built by an American contractor. And therefore, this wouldn't really be under Armenian control. It wouldn't really be under Azerbaijani control. It would be basically this contractor would have been built. So, I mean, no American taxpayers theoretically are going to be involved, but it will be under effective American control. And naturally, this is the kind of thing that would very much appeal to President Trump. And he's already thinking of calling it the Trump corridors, as you might expect. So let's just sort of take a look, first of all, at Trump's announcement on Truth Social about this impending meeting in Washington to sign an agreement. He's, of course, very excited about it because, naturally, This will be one more notch in his belt in his campaign to secure the Nobel Peace Prize. And here we have, I look forward to hosting the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, at the White House tomorrow for a historic peace summit. These two nations have been at war for many years, resulting in the deaths of thousands of people. Many leaders have tried to end the war with no success until now, thanks to Trump. My administration has been engaged with both sides for quite some time. Tomorrow, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan will join me at the White House for an official peace signing ceremony. The United States will also sign bilateral agreements with both countries to pursue economic opportunities, so we can fully unlock the potential of the South Caucasus region. I'm very proud of these courageous leaders for doing the right thing for the great people of Armenia and Azerbaijan. It will be a historic day for Armenia, Azerbaijan, the United States, and the world. See you then, DJT. So obviously he's delighted about it, but it was in a way he or the Americans who broke the deadlock as to this Zangezur corridor, because they weren't getting anywhere. Armenia wasn't going to allow Azerbaijan to control this land bridge, and Azerbaijan wasn't going to allow Armenia to control it. So somebody had to step in and say, okay, we'll control it. Here then is Axios' story about this. Trump to oversee Armenia-Azerbaijan peace accord on Friday. The U.S. brokered agreement is intended to ensure peace, but also has a significant economic component. Armenia has agreed to allow a 43.5-kilometer corridor through its territory to be developed by the U.S. and named, yes, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, linking the bulk of Azerbaijan to a small Azeri enclave on the Turkish border. Of course, they get it wrong. It's not enclave, it's exclave. But, what can you do? The intrigue, the corridor will allow people and goods to travel between Turkey and Azerbaijan and beyond to Central Asia without passing through Iran and Russia. And of course, that's the whole purpose of this Zangezur corridor, that it would bypass Iran and Russia. And the whole purpose is to diminish the power and influence of both Iran and Russia. That's not currently possible because the Armenia-Azerbaijan border is close and highly fortified. Iran strongly opposes the project, and Russia has also criticized it, while Turkey is strongly in favor. Both countries are former Soviet republics and have strained ties with Moscow in recent years. By unblocking this issue, Americans are going to benefit in billions of dollars of new trade annually. Russia and Iran and China lose influence in a part of the world they consider their own domain. And then the Trump administration pitched Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan on the idea that by agreeing to allow the U.S. to develop the transit corridor, he would be gaining a friend in Washington and a powerful buffer against any future invasions by Azerbaijan. And I think that's crucial. That's the key to understanding what's really going on. Armenia was very disenchanted with Russia. Armenia is a small country, population around 4 million, very vulnerable, two very hostile states, one to the west, one to the east, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Turkey, which had attempted once before, more than 100 years ago, to extinguish the Armenian nation altogether, is certainly no friend of the Armenians. And then, of course, you've got Azerbaijan, which now, with Aliyev and his own imperial fantasies, is claiming that Armenian territory actually is Azerbaijani territories. He claims that Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, is actually an Azeri city. So without Russia to protect Armenia, it's not immediately obvious where Armenia can go for any kind of help. And so it's perfectly understandable why Pashinyan should have turned to the United States and turned to the United States in a particularly interesting way. Because if the Americans essentially become responsible for this transport corridor, it's built by the Americans and the Americans are going to protect it, then the Americans have a vested interest in the security and survival of Armenia. And so the Americans, would then, in theory, have a vested interest in preserving Armenia. So while Russia is going to be off to the side, unable or unwilling to do anything to help Armenia, the United States would be on hand to help out. That's the calculation. Whether that turns out to be real is something we will see. But that is a perfectly reasonable calculation made by Pashinyan. Obviously, it's not something that is making Russia very happy. It's not making Iran very happy. And it's clearly the opposition within Armenia is very strong. It's not clear at all that Pashinyan will win next year's elections. But on the face of it, when the survival of your country is at stake, you have to make sacrifices, and you have to then do whatever you need to do to bring in some big player to protect you. And then here, if you want to take a look at the Zangezur corridor, and you can see what's happening here. It's right at the southern tip of Armenia, right by the border with Iran, and it links, as you see, Azerbaijan proper with the Nakhchivan exclave. And then here it's a little bit clearer. This is the road and railway link. But by building it right on Iran's borders, then Iran obviously is extremely unhappy about this, and particularly as it will now have on its northern border a hostile state of Azerbaijan. I mean, it already suspects that Azerbaijan is a tacit ally of Israel's and that it was involved in the recent war between Israel and Iran on Israel's side, had carried out intelligence operations against Iran. And then, of course, the United States. It will mean that the United States will have a presence right in the northern border of Iran. So, Tehran is quite concerned about this the Zangezur corridor. And then it was the first indication that this was what the Americans were planning in the near future was came earlier in last month by Thomas Barak, who was the US ambassador to Turkey. And he gave a talk at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And here he talks about Azerbaijan and Armenia. He says they're arguing over 32 kilometers of road, but this is no joke. It's been going on for a decade, 32 kilometers of road. So what happens is America comes in and says, okay, we'll take it over. Give us the 32 kilometers of road on a 100-year lease, and you can all share it. But these tribal points of view do not fade. We came into an e pluribus unum, which is out of many one. What does that mean? It means give up the masses for one. It exists in America. It doesn't exist there. It's individual, family, tribe, and then the nation. But my hope is over time, e pluribus unum will catch on, and we can convert from Latin to Arabic, from Arabic to Russian, from Russian to China. Maybe we have a shot. So that was, he said, that is the plan. But it's very important and then it was mentioned in other places. So here was the Caucasus War Report, kind of a well-informed account. It says the Trump administration is advancing a proposal that would introduce a US-run commercial operator as a neutral guarantor of the Zangezur corridor. The corridor would connect mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave, providing Baku with a direct overland route. According to Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the plan would place a US-based logistics firm in charge of managing and monitoring cargo transit and along the corridor. So the construction would be under American auspices, but management and monitoring would also be under American auspices. With data shared among all the parties, the approach aims to satisfy Azerbaijan's demand for long-term security guarantees while preserving Armenian sovereignty over the route. And says, crucially, the plan completely excludes Russia from both the negotiation table and the corridor's implementation. A calculated decision that underscores Moscow's declining influence in the South Caucasus. It definitely does, because, and as we'll see in a minute, when the November 2020 war between Armenia and Azerbaijan concluded, as I said, Azerbaijan won that very quickly and very decisively, but a peace agreement was cobbled together under Russian auspices, and it specifically addressed the issue of the Zangezur corridor. And it said that there would indeed be a road and rail transport hub linking Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan, but that this corridor would be under the supervision of Russia. Russia would be there, the FSB of Russia would be there to ensure that, the transport, goes, smoothly, and all the trains run on time and so on. But the Russians would be there. That would be under their auspices. But here the Russians are not involved at all. That exclusion is the main reason why Russia is attempting to disrupt the talks, destabilize both Armenia and Azerbaijan to prevent progress. As Russia's traditional role erodes, the US sees an opportunity to reshape the regional balance of power in the South Caucasus region. And here we had the first inkling a couple of weeks ago of what was in this deal. And it was clearly kind of a humiliation for Armenia. But Pashinyan made the calculation that he has to endure this humiliation in exchange for getting an American security guarantee. And here the headline, Pashinyan agrees to cede the region of Armenia to the United States, but France will suffer. Who cares? Thanks to representatives of the Armenian diaspora in France who prefer to remain anonymous and who managed to leverage their contacts with the government of Armenia, our team was able to obtain a confidential document titled Memorandum of Understanding on the creation of the Trump Bridge Transportation Corridor. And then here the memorandum stipulates the implementation of the Trump Bridge bilateral regional economic corridor and defense gateway project. This 42-kilometer transportation corridor will traverse the Siunik region of Armenia. This corridor connects Azerbaijan with the Nakhchivan enclave. Again, they get it wrong, it's exclave. A strategic region located between the borders of Armenia and Iran. The creation of this corridor was one of Azerbaijan's main demands on Armenia following the 2020 war. And then the distribution of revenue, and this is always very the kind of thing that Trump likes to check, will be the distribution of revenue generated by the corridor's use highlights the underlying interests of this agreement. The US management company will receive 40% of the revenue, while Armenia will only receive 30%. That's the way it goes. Armenia is thus deprived of its territory for a minimum period of 99 years. But at least if they're deprived of this territory, deprived of it for the United States and not for Azerbaijan. It's worth noting that the memorandum provides for the deployment of significant US forces on Armenian territory. And that's the crucial gift for Armenia. That's what it wanted. The US forces that will be now stationed Armenian territory, and that provides Armenia with some kind of protection against Azerbaijan. According to available information, these will not be from regular US military, but from a US private military company. This private military company, currently estimated at 1,000 fighters, will be responsible for ensuring security along the transport corridor. And then the mere and the mere entry of U.S. troops, sorry, the mere entry of U.S. troops into Armenian territory is enough to make Nikol Pashinyan's signing of the memorandum a national betrayal from the perspective of Armenians, both inside Armenia and around the world. In effect, Armenia is forced to surrender a large portion of its sovereign territory, which it is placing under the control and management of US forces, and accept the implementation of a major project for Azerbaijan and Turkey without any compensation. Because this is a big deal. This is essentially creating this big transportation hub. It links Turkey with Azerbaijan, going through the Caucasus, into Central Asia, and into China. So it's a major, ultimately China to Europe trade and transportation hub, because from Turkey, then you move into the Balkans and into Europe. And lo and behold, who's excluded from this? Well, Russia and China. And here we have this is the where are we? Yeah. This is initially the border will be controlled by soldiers without heavy weapons, but for the army, this will mean no more distance between Iran and the United States. This threatens to spark a major war in a region stretching from the Mediterranean to the South Caucasus. The Armenian-US memorandum is a catastrophe for Armenia, strips it of all sovereignty. This US occupation would not solve the country's problems. Only the United States and Turkey will benefit from it. Now, and this I just want to, just to remind you, this was the agreement in November the 10th, 2020, that was brokered by Russia after Armenia's defeat. All economic and transport connections in the region shall be unblocked. The Republic of Armenia shall guarantee the security of transport connections between the western regions of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic in order to arrange unobstructed movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo in both directions. So they're saying Armenia needs to facilitate this, shall guarantee the security of transport connections between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. And then the border guard service of the Russian Federal Security Service shall be responsible for overseeing the transport connection. So this was the critical part of that agreement in November 2020. The Russian Federal Secret Service, the FSB, would be responsible for overseeing the transport connections between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. And now there's no Russian role in this whatsoever. It's all going to be done by the Americans. Now, Trump, of course, will want to claim credit for all of this, and the signing is taking place in the White House, and so therefore that's kind of it's happening under Trump's watch. But the first moves towards moving Armenia into this satellite-dependent relationship on the United States took place in the dying days of the Biden administration. So on 14th of January 2025, in other words, just 6 days before Trump assumed office, Armenia and the United States signed a strategic partnership charter. And of course, it has the usual baloney. United States welcomes efforts by Armenia to deepen its political, economic, security, and social ties in the Euro-Atlantic community. Now, we all know what that means. Euro-Atlantic, that's a nice way of saying NATO. A dignified and durable peace is essential for a more stable and prosperous future of the South Caucasus. The United States supports the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Remember, this is January 2025, so this is already long after the complete ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, to the point that, there was no Armenian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh at all. And here the United States is talking about the peace process. And then it goes on. The United States supports the unblocking of regional transport communications in the South Caucasus. That's it. So in others, they were already raising that issue of the Zangezur corridor. United States supports the unblocking of regional transport communications in the South Caucasus, based on full respect for the country's sovereignty and jurisdiction, recognizing that the flow of goods and people across borders leads to interdependencies and mutual benefits for neighbors. The United States also intends to continue to advocate for normalization of relations between Armenia and its neighbors. And then it goes on, recognizing the persistence of threats to global peace and stability, Armenia and the United States intend to expand the scope of their defense and security cooperation programs. Keep in mind, Armenia is still a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. It's still essentially a member of that Eastern version of NATO. And yet here is Armenia talking about expanding its security and defense cooperation with the United States. The United States recognizes Armenia's important contribution to peacekeeping efforts in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, Lebanon. Imagine peacekeeping. And then deepening Armenia's integration into the Euro-Atlantic institutions is a mutual priority, and we plan to expand the security cooperation and so on. And now here, this is the interesting aspect of course, Iran is now much weakened. It's lost key allies in the region, and is obviously looking with great concern at the Zangezur corridor, because it essentially will block Iran from access to the Caucasus and to Russia, because that was its trade route through Armenia, and it'll have the United States military presence on its northern border. Not to mention that it's going to have Azerbaijan there, now absolutely cock-a-hoop over its military victories and on its heightened global profile. So a U.S. proposal to place the proposed Zangezur corridor under American management has deepened fault lines in the South Caucasus and stirred unease in Iran. At stake is not just regional connectivity, but the geopolitical order along Iran's sensitive northern frontier. For Iran, the 43-kilometer corridor through Armenia's Syunik province cuts to the core of its strategic calculations. And then they quote this Hamidreza Azizi, this fellow at the German Institute for International Security Affairs. He warns that the plan would deprive Iran of its natural land access to the South Caucasus through Armenia, placing it at the mercy of a route controlled by Azerbaijan or other international actors. And then he calls it a nail in the coffin, and geopolitical suffocation. And then if Baku gains control or foreign management is introduced, Iran would lose leverage over its northern trade. Iran would be almost exclusively reliant on Azerbaijan for trade, not only with the South Caucasus, but also with Russia and Europe. And it would obviously be a serious blow to Iran's geo-economic standing. He added that sidelining Iran's route through Armenia could also reduce its role in China's Belt and Road Initiative. And then, the concern is Tehran's main concern is clear. The corridor could expand Turkish influence and now bring a direct US presence. So this whole deal, which Trump will obviously celebrate, is clearly a blow to Iran. There's obviously the United States has been dealing one blow after another against Iran for many years, but it's also a blow against Russia. It was always obvious, as I said earlier, that Russia's kind of standoffish policy, hands-off policy in that war in November 2020 would come back to haunt Russia. Armenia was bound to start making its own strategic calculations over the lack of any assistance provided. The biggest concern is in Iran that such a corridor would once and for all end any prospect of Iran's involvement in East-West transport. And here, this is an article in Carnegie, which makes clear that Armenia's position is obviously very perilous, so much so that if you can go by the headline, it's seeking good relations with Turkey, its long-standing enemy, because it needs protection against Azerbaijan. The Turkey is going to protect Azerbaijan. This was written before the United States and its involvement in Zangezur, but the message is clear. Namely, that Armenia is badly in need of protection from this hungry Azerbaijan. And then here it says Azerbaijan holds key high ground and enjoys clear military superiority. Analysts warn that a fresh offensive could split Armenia in two within a couple of days. To avert disaster, Turkey has been engaging behind the scenes. When tensions have spiked, Ankara has reportedly dispatched delegations to Baku urging restraint. So remember, Azerbaijan is a close ally of Turkey's. And so Turkey says, well, they had to send envoys to Baku to restrain their ambitions, because ultimately no one's going to come to Armenia's assistance. I think that's what Pashinyan kind of realized. So he's totally at the mercy of Azerbaijan, and so he badly needs protection. So here, so far, Turkey has provided some protection when it's saying they've had to go to Baku and urge restraint. Some Western diplomats view Ankara's efforts as part of a broader push to rebrand itself as a stabilizing force in the region. And then paradoxically, Turkey may now be the only regional actor capable of restraining Azerbaijan. Russia's influence has waned with its Ukraine war, and Iran is distracted by its crisis with Israel and the United States. For Armenia, Turkey, once seen purely as a threat, is increasingly viewed as the last line of regional deterrence. And then Azerbaijan wants to begin by opening the southern route, which it calls the Zangezur corridor, and then and it says that it says that while the 2020 Russia brokered ceasefire envisioned some form of Russian oversight, not some form, complete Russian oversight, Armenia now insists on full control over any corridor, but that was flatly rejected, and that was kind of shocking. Azerbaijan said, absolutely not. This corridor will be completely under Azerbaijani control. We're not going to have any Armenians anywhere on this corridor. Not even no passport control, customs control, nothing. No Armenian presence at all. That was the demand of Azerbaijan. And then Baku, however, remains skeptical and refuses to invest in a route it sees as vulnerable to political changes in Yerevan. It's therefore demanding a third-party guarantor to ensure long-term stability. And then, hence, this is where the United States comes in. And so that's it. So what do we conclude from this? Obviously, Trump will hail this as a great victory, but as I said, the seeds were sown by the Biden administration. I mean, the strategic partnership signed between the United States and Armenia, which explicitly addressed the issue of the transport corridor, that was all signed by Biden. Trump simply inherited this. But the more serious issue is the waning influence of Russia in its own backyard. As I said at the beginning, Armenia and Azerbaijan had both been constituent republics of the USSR. The Transcaucasian Federation, which included Armenia and Azerbaijan and Georgia, had been one of the original founding republics of the USSR. Later, they became separate republics, and even in the aftermath of the fall of the USSR, this was still Russia's backyard. Everything was determined by Russia. But this is one of the consequences of this protracted conflict in Ukraine, that Russia is very preoccupied with this war and simply doesn't have the resources, the time, the energy to devote to matters that are of some concern to Russia. There's certainly, excluding Russia from the Caucasus and creating this vast trade route that goes around Russia that's a big deal. That's not something that one can just overlook. Iran realizes that it's a very big deal, and so this is, without question, a major geopolitical shift in the Caucasus, and this one has to say that it's a relatively easy victory for the United States. The United States didn't have to do anything very much. I mean, it was the events that led to this deal being signed today in Washington. There were events that were hatched in the Caucasus through other countries' neglect and absent-mindedness. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.